And we're live. Welcome back to today's national weather forecast. Even though this map right now, this is showing this morning, even though that looks like there is no precipitation for the entire country, that is quickly going to change as you're going to be seeing throughout this video. So it's first going to change for the west. As I always say, weather moves from west to east. So first, this next storm system is going to be coming in as some light rain and snow for parts of Oregon and California. And then it's going to move down into Southern California. You can see it start to get a little stronger there, while the first part of that turns into a snowstorm for the Midwest. So that's going to bring some snow to Minnesota, but large parts of the Midwest are actually going to be getting rain because we'll have some 25 to 30 degree above average temperatures throughout that region. Now, if that was the only part of the storm, that would be something to talk about. It'd be maybe 2 to 5 inches of snow throughout Minnesota and parts of Wisconsin and Michigan, but that wouldn't be all that of a story. Now, where the weather starts getting a lot stronger is as we get into Thursday and Friday, even into Saturday. You're going to see that storm has officially moved out of California, and then it's going to start bringing some heavy snow to Colorado and then some heavy rain to the plains and the southeast. And then this system appears to just be stalling over this region for quite some time. So right about here, that's where you start to see that snow and rain show up right in the bullseye center of the country about Friday morning. Now, as we continue to click through here, what's happening? You notice it looks like it's getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and that's because it's feeding in some moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. So you think the low pressure system is right there. That counterclockwise circulation around it means that on the right side here, it's pulling in some moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, while as on the left side, it's pulling down that cold air. So on the right side where it's pulling up the warm, moist air, we're going to be seeing some heavy rain throughout places like Oklahoma, and then that heavy rain will be spreading out throughout much of the southeast and even into the Midwest. And then where it's pulling that cold air down and then mixing it with the moisture, that's where we're going to be seeing some heavy snow, and especially in Colorado, where there's even some places that are expected to pick up 2 feet of snow in the next week. That could be a bit on the extreme side, and this is a ways off in the forecast, so there's many things that could change there, but I'd say this storm as of right now is looking fairly confident that Colorado is getting at least 1 foot of snow. And then you'll notice so right here, that's where it's just collecting all this moisture, getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and then it's almost going to spread out, start to bring some heavy rain into Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, and then spread that snow out into the upper Midwest. And we'll also be diving into Minnesota to see how much snow will be coming up there. That has the potential to turn into a major snowstorm as well. And then that continues to go. What you'll notice is, again, how much rain is falling with this one. As we're through Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, most of Michigan, and then as we get into the Northeast, most of that's falling as rain. And that has to do with the temperature anomaly map, which I'll show later in this video, where it's 25 to 30 degrees above average temperatures, first starting in the Midwest and then moving east across the country. So that's the big stories that we're talking about. Just to show it again, it's that storm moving into the west. It'll actually start to come in the next hour or two, where we're going to start to get that rain and snow into Northern California. Then the bulk of that storm is going to move down into Southern California, while we get our first little snowstorm up into the Midwest. And then the big story is as that collects itself over the center of the country, turns into what could bring over 1 foot of snow to Colorado, and that's some heavy rain into places like Missouri and Arkansas, down through the southeast. And then that's just going to spread out across the entire eastern half of the country. That's most likely going to be the story we're going to be talking about for the rest of this week. Like I always say though, weather forecast models change every day, so it's going to be very interesting to see what actually ends up happening with that system, because I guarantee that picture, which is all the way into this time next week, guarantee that's going to look differently by the time I'm doing my Monday morning forecast next week. So we'll just have to wait and see how it changes. If we want to take a look at the precipitation as it comes in, for this mostly just think of where we're going to be getting rain. I'll show the snowfall map in a second. right up there in the Sierras, that's where we're getting our snowfall. But along the coast, you can see California, there's no point where the storm seems like it's going to be intense, like heavy rain or heavy snow for California. It seems like it's just lightly falling for a long period of time. So with that, we're actually going to be able to get over an inch of rain along almost the entire California coast, stretching from the Oregon border all the way down to San Diego, which is great news when it comes to the drought. Now right here is also where that's going to be falling as rain. It's a very clear split in the country. It's almost like the western and northwestern half is cold, so that's where we're getting our snowfall, and then the eastern half and especially the southeastern half of the country is where we're getting our rainfall. And you can see where the heaviest rainfall is going to be right in that bullseye, right there in Oklahoma, into Missouri and Kansas, parts of Arkansas. That's where by this time next week, we're expecting maybe 4 to 5 inches of rain. So that's the bullseye of the rain. And then you can see it's spread out across the southeast. By midweek next week, that's where we could have picked up 4 inches of rain in the southeast. But I think the real story when it comes to the rain is what's going on there in parts of Oklahoma into Missouri, because that's where it's falling in a shorter time span. That's all within the next 7 days we get that heavy rain right there. So rainfall wise, California coast and that bullseye in the very center of the country, where remember that's where that storm just continues to collect itself, bringing in moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. A lot of that moisture appears to be falling right over Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, and Arkansas, where we could get 4 to 5 inches of rain. And then when it comes to the snowfall forecast, you'll notice once again it starts here in the west, and especially up here in NorCal. Then it actually moves down into SoCal a little bit, while the first little part of that system starts to move up north and into the Midwest. Right there you can see Minnesota could have some totals, 2 to 6 inches of snow up there in the very northern parts of the state. You'll notice most of the Midwest at this point, though, missing out on that snowstorm. And again, that's because much of the Midwest at this point is 25 to 30 degrees above average. So that alone would be a story, but that almost looks like a small snowstorm compared to what's happening after that. So as that system continues to pass out of California, this is now getting into Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, that's where it starts to pull in some more moisture from the Gulf of Mexico and bring some rather large totals to places in Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, where we're likely to get over a foot of snow. The question is, how much more than a foot of snow could we get? Maybe 2 feet? That's where we'll just have to wait and see what how the forecast models change. And then with that second system, you notice that one's a little bit wider spread throughout the Midwest, although much of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, large parts of Michigan, still missing out on that one. And that's because those locations still have above average temperatures. But up here through Wisconsin and Minnesota, that's where by about this time next week, you could have a total of maybe 10 inches of snow, especially throughout Minnesota, where we'll be taking a good local look. But again, rainfall, that's the bullseye right there that we're going to be looking at, rainfall in Missouri, and then snowfall, Colorado and Wyoming. We'll be taking a local look there as well. So let's actually look at these as they go across the country. And the first thing I notice on this map is this giant ridge stretching all the way up into the Midwest. So you think if these lines were flat, some of those lines that are up here in Wisconsin, if they were flat, they'd maybe be down here by Tennessee. So how you can kind of think of this is you're getting some of that air that could be in Tennessee all the way up here in Wisconsin. So that's why we have those 25 to 30 degree above average temperatures. It's because some of that southern air is being pushed upward. Now the exact opposite is happening on the western side of the country, because that's where we have this trough and the storm system pushing in. So that ridge on the eastern half of the country explains why our temperatures are 25 to 30 degrees above average. This trough right here is this storm as it starts to move in. And I'll go back to Monday. That's right as this trough is starting to work its way in. That's where we're going to start to get some light rain and snow throughout Northern California. And then watch as this moves across the state. It's a very slow mover. It just looks like it's rotating and rotating and rotating, almost still in California as we get into Friday. So with some of those storms we had last week, and especially that one on Friday, you might not even notice the storm on Friday in California because it came in Friday night and it was gone by Saturday morning. It was a really quick mover where the trough just blasted right in and out of NorCal in about 12 hours. This is quite a different story. It's just going to slowly meander its way across the state. So we're going to have light rain and snow for possibly all week, most likely through Monday and Wednesday, especially for NorCal. And something else I'll say about this, I'm saying it's light rain and snow because you'll notice how far apart these isobars are. When these lines of constant pressure are that far apart, it doesn't tell you that there's a lot of intensity or energy in the storm. Where the lines are closer together, that's where you start to get some heavier winds, some heavier rain, some heavier snow. And it looks like, for the most part, those closer lines are going to be either coming in right into San Diego or just south of that. So overall, not a major storm for California, but it will be nice just getting some rain and snow. Certainly helps with the drought there. So then you'll also watch, I'll go back, you can see that first little snowstorm that pushes up into the Midwest. It's this little blip right there that you can see jumps up, and that's the one that's bringing maybe 2 to 5 inches of snow into parts of Minnesota, some locations in Wisconsin, and upper Michigan. Now that's not the big snowstorm. The big snowstorm is as that one continues to move out of California, getting into Saturday and Sunday, and right here, it just looks like a giant cutoff low in the center of the country. You can imagine the winds flowing around this. You can actually see the little wind barbs if you look really closely. They're going counterclockwise around this. So on this side, they're bringing down cold air from Montana and Canada, bringing that cold air into Colorado. On this side, they're pulling some of that moisture out of the Gulf of Mexico and bringing it right into that low pressure system. So then on the right side of this, where it's bringing in the warm air, that's where we're getting rainfall. And then where that moisture is pushed into places like Wyoming and Colorado that are also being mixed with the cold air, that's where we get our heavy snowfall. And then you'll notice that giant cutoff low appears to be moving right up into the Midwest, and that's where we get some heavier snowfall totals up into Minnesota. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this one because it's a ways off in the forecast, but it looks like there could be another little system following in behind that next week, but that's far enough out in the forecast that I'm not going to spend too much time on that. So again, if we just go back to the beginning here, remember the first thing I noticed was that giant ridge stretching all the way up into the Midwest. So that explains why the temperatures up in the Midwest are 25 to 30 degrees above average throughout Wisconsin, Minnesota, and then getting into North Dakota and South Dakota as well, 25 to 30 degrees above average. And it looks like that's actually going to get even more intense as we get into Tuesday, where we start to get some 35 to 40 degree above average temperatures. So that's why as that first system goes through on Wednesday, some of that warm air is still in this region. So much of the Midwest, this is about the time when that first system's going through. You can actually see where the low would be right about there, where that would be the cold front side of the low pressure system, and that would be the warm front side of the low pressure system. So much of the Midwest, as that low pressure system moves through, is still 25 to 30 degrees above average. So all of that is just going to be getting rainfall as that first part of the system pushes through. Wow, that is a perfect graphic to show that warm front, cold front I was just talking about. Right there on a low, you'll see this in meteorology textbooks, but you typically have a cold front stretching out south and southwest from the low pressure system and a warm front almost directly to the east. You can see exactly how that works on this map. That is one of the best graphics I've ever seen to explain this phenomena. Because you can think, if the low pressure system is right there between Wisconsin and Minnesota, and the winds are flowing counterclockwise around it, right there you're going to be pushing in warm air into the upper peninsula of Michigan, so that's your warm front. On this side, that's where you're pulling down some of this cold air from North Dakota and South Dakota, so that's going to be your cold front, because that cold air, you'll watch, will be spreading throughout Iowa and then into Illinois. And you'll see that continue to spread out throughout the rest of the country. So probably just spent too long explaining that graphic, but that was just a perfect example of how a low pressure system and the fronts around it typically work. And it also explains why much of the Midwest will be getting rain with that first system. Now the next one is a little bit different. Right here, that's where you can start to see these colder temperatures being pulled down into parts of Kansas and Colorado where we're 25 to 30 degrees below average temperatures. That's where the low pressure system is right here around Oklahoma. And again, you can see that cold front side of it stretching into Texas and the warm front side of it almost stretching straight into Tennessee. So it's the exact same thing we were just talking about, but now it's in the very center of the country and there's a more clearly defined cold blob of air behind it. That's what's going to allow those snowfall totals to be so great throughout Colorado. Well, great depending on your outlook of snow. I should say large. So that cold air seems to be sticking around, and we'll see if that works its way up into the Midwest. It looks like for the most part, with that second part of the system, the Midwest is going to be relatively mild temperatures. Not too warm, not too cold. So we'll have to just take a local look to see what kind of snowfall we're getting up there. But I would say there's a much better chance of snowfall with that second system because we're at least not 30 degrees above average anymore. Key thing though, I think on this map, are those cold temperatures throughout Colorado and Wyoming where we're 25 to 30 degrees below average. That's what's going to allow a lot of that heavy snowfall to fall. So let's take a look at Wednesday. Or actually, we'll just go to right now, see if we can see some of those warm temperatures throughout the day today. Yeah, all the way up into North Dakota and South Dakota, we have temperatures almost even into the 60s at some places. That's not exactly normal. That's why we have those 25 to 30 degree above average temperatures. We're all the way up to 60 degrees in South Dakota and parts of Minnesota in the mid 50s as well. And then as we get into Wednesday, right about there is where you can see the actual temperatures for what we were talking about earlier with that cold front and warm front. You can see where the warm air is still residing on the eastern side of that low, where you can almost see how this warm air is being pulled up from the Gulf of Mexico. You imagine that warm air right there being pulled into that low pressure system above Minnesota, and you can actually see the strip of warm air going from Texas all the way up into parts of Michigan. So that's where we're getting rainfall with that first system. Well, you notice parts of Minnesota are below freezing. You notice by the blue color there, because that's where the cold air is being pulled down. So that's where we can get some snowfall with that first system. Now with the next one, the bigger of the two, that's where that cold air really starts to fill into Wyoming and Colorado, temperatures in the teens. Hopefully not the single digits, but certainly below freezing. So that's what's going to allow all that snowfall to fall. One other thing I noticed as we're clicking through this map, keeping your eye on the northeast. As that major storm starts to work through the Midwest, majority of the Northeast is still in the 30s and 40s, possibly even the 50s. So I'm not expecting any snowfall for the Northeast at this point in time. But again, we'll have to see how the forecast changes. But as we get into next week, it looks like there's going to be a pretty clearly defined pattern across the country where the Southeast is warm in the 60s and possibly 70s, whereas almost the entire northwestern half of the country looks to be below freezing as we get into Wednesday. And that was at the night, but some of that cold air will be sticking around even throughout some of the daytime hours. Now, another part of this story as this system goes through is what's going on with the winds. So right about, let's go back to the beginning. You can see where it starts to come in. Right now, California looks pretty calm, but as in the next hour or two, as this storm shows up, you see some of those winds associated with the storm show up as well, gusting into 30 to 40 miles per hour, especially up in the higher elevations. Where the extreme winds are going to be more of a factor are actually, or it is actually, as they get into parts of Kansas and Missouri before a lot of that precipitation, the heavy precipitation comes in. Right there, we're getting gusts of 45 to 50 miles per hour. And because this is before a lot of the moisture has moved into this region, there's actually a fire threat in that location due to those extreme wind gusts, 45 to 50 miles per hour. And again, that's throughout Tuesday into Wednesday, I think that largest fire threat. And you can actually see that red flag showing up there for parts of Kansas into Missouri. Again, that's before the moisture has started to move in, before a lot of that rainfall has fallen. And with 45 to 50 mile per hour wind gusts, when you mix it with some dry air, there's going to be some low relative humidities there. That's why we actually have a fire warning. I looked at some of the fuel moistures though, and it doesn't look I should be hesitant to say it doesn't look all that bad, because you should always be careful anytime there's a red flag warning. But I wouldn't exactly say it's the critical fire threat that we had for Arizona and parts of New Mexico and Texas last week. Still something to note though, there are red flag warnings throughout Colorado into Kansas and Missouri, and even some parts of Oklahoma. Then also on this map, you can see this storm starting to move into the west. Right there, we have some winter weather advisories, warnings, watches throughout California. That gives you a good idea of where we're going to be getting some of that heavy rain and snow. And I know you should never be excited about warnings or anything, but it's actually kind of good to see them stretching all the way down into Southern California. That's where some of our really dry fuels are. There, we did get some rain last week, but for the most part this season, we have very low rainfall totals. We're in some deficits, so even though you're not supposed to get excited for any warnings, I would say for the most part, I'm more concerned about drought and fire danger. So I would say I'm actually pretty happy to see some rain and snow moving into California. So let's actually just focus on that region first, because as we've talked about, what happens to the central parts of the country and then eventually up into the Midwest and parts of the South first comes in the next hour or two in California, as you can start to see some of that rain and snow build into NorCal. And then as the system continues to move over California, I'll show it again in a second, but remember how slow it is. It's just constant light rain and snow all the way into what looks like Friday and Saturday before it's finally moved off in the center of the country. See that another way? You can start to see that trough move in really the next hour or two. I'm just looking out my window waiting to see some rain. Hopefully it happens in the middle of this live stream. That would be a great way to perfectly identify when the rain is starting to fall, at least down in the South Bay. But that trough is going to move in, and you'll notice, the lines of constant pressure aren't all that close together, which tells me it's not going to be an extreme storm. It's just going to be some, most likely, light to moderate rain and snow for a long period of time. And I say long period of time because it doesn't just move through in 24 hours. That's where you see that low can just slowly meander its way across the state, just rotating right there. And it's not really even gone until Saturday or Sunday when it's finally out of Southern California. So just clicking through that again because it perfectly shows what's going on here. Trough moves in right now. First goes through Northern California for the most part. Southern California is still out of the weather action at this point, but then that's going to change as it continues to almost even turn into a cutoff low and move directly over Southern California. So those are the key places that we're going to be looking at. Just to see that in precipitation terms, right there as we get into Monday morning, that's where we're going to start to see some of that rain and snow, especially on the north coast. And then as I click through there, you're noticing it's not heavy rain, it's not heavy snow. That right there is maybe moderate, maybe 0.1 inches per hour, stretching all the way into the Bay Area Tuesday night into Wednesday. But it's not 0.5 inches per hour, like some of the heavy rain that we're going to see later in this video when we get into the southeast. What's great to see though is as we get into Wednesday morning, that's where this storm has shifted all the way down into Southern California. Almost the entire coast of California getting some rain at this point. Areas around Los Angeles stretching all the way down into San Diego getting some moderate rainfall, and then the entire Sierra is getting some snowfall. So you'll notice there's never any periods where it looks like heavy rain or snow, but it continues to fall all the way into Saturday morning. So that's some great news there because it's kind of the best of both worlds. You're not having that extreme punch of rain and snow where you can have extreme damages and severe flooding. It's just light rain and snow, which again doesn't damage property as much. It just helps us out with the drought and fuel moisture and fire danger. So if we look at the precipitation, you'll notice first comes into Northern California, and then as we continue to click through after Wednesday into Thursday and Friday, that's where it stretches all the way down into Southern California. Overall, I would say last week's models actually did a pretty good job because last week when we were forecasting this, it was a ways off in the forecast, so it was questionable about what could happen. This is a similar picture to what some of the models were showing last Thursday and Friday, so that tells me that they're becoming more confident about what's going to happen. And what is going to happen, it looks like over an inch to maybe an inch and a half directly along the coast, while 0.5 inches throughout much of California. And then to look at, first, before we get into the snowfall, first I'll just point out, seeing over an inch down here in Southern California is great. That's one area where we have extremely dry fuels. And then it's also great to see over an inch building into the north coast because that's where we have the worst drought in California. Or not directly along the coast, but parts of Northern California. And then when it comes to the snowfall, there's the first part of the system where it brings over a foot of snow to very Northern California. And then as we continue to click through, that's where we get over a foot, foot and a half throughout the Sierras. And then all the way down into the Southern California mountains, there will be some areas that pick up over a foot of snow. And then you'll also notice that large parts of Nevada, I purposely waited to talk about the rest of the region here until this slide because for the most part this will be falling as snow. And you can see almost all of Nevada covered in some snow. Utah, Colorado is the key place we're going to be looking at for the snowfall forecast in this video. Just large amounts of snow falling throughout much of this region, which again is great because that's where we have some of the worst drought in the entire country. It's almost surprising that California, I'm so used to saying California is the worst drought in the country, but as you can see, parts of Nevada, Utah, Arizona, even Colorado and New Mexico are actually in even worse drought than California is right now. So again, it's great to see a lot of that precipitation not just all fall on California, really spread throughout the region. And then again, right there, that's what I was talking about for some of the worst drought in California is up here in Northern California, so it's good to see some of that rain flowing into there as well. So I want to show the vorticity map, but to think of this, you can just think of storm energy because it perfectly shows how there's almost two waves with this system. One that comes directly through NorCal, and then one that's more spread out throughout the entire state. Right now, it's mostly through NorCal. You see that energy going directly, and it almost looks right above the Bay Area. And then that's going to move out up into Idaho and Montana, bring some rain and snow up there as well. Then you'll notice as that low continues to just meander across the state, then a lot of that storm energy or vorticity gets more spread out. And this ties in with something we were talking about earlier, where you see those lines closer together, the isobars or lines of constant pressure. That's where a storm will be more extreme. So earlier when I was saying, as this first comes in, it looks like it's going to be very light rain and snow because the isobars are so far apart, which just gives you a good idea that it's going to be a relatively weak system. Then, as we get into the back end of this, after it's kind of turned into this cutoff low here, some of those lines get a little bit closer into Southern California, and you can actually see the energy that's associated with those tighter isobars. You could think of it just as a gradient or a tray that's being tilted. If the tray is tilted, okay, that probably didn't make sense because that's an overall analogy I use to explain winds. So if you have just a tray and you pour some water on it and the tray's flat, the water's just going to sit there. If you start to tilt the tray up a little bit, then pour the water will slowly flow down the tray. Then if you make the tray super steep, pour the water again, then it's going to flow down the tray super fast. The exact same thing is happening in the atmosphere here. Down here in New Mexico, you can think of that as the top of your tray, that area of the tray that's being lifted up. Down here in California, you could think of that as the bottom of the tray. So the tighter those lines are together, the steeper you can think that tray is being lifted, which means the winds are going to be stronger and you'll have more moisture flowing in. It just leads to more storm energy, as you can see there. So that is looking like it could bring some more heavy rain and snow to Southern California, especially at the end of this storm as we start to see some more of that energy take place. That gives you a good idea of what we're expecting when it gets to the center of the country. A lot stronger than it looks when it goes through California, so that's why that's one of the key places we're going to be looking at later in this video. First, I want to take a look at Northern California just to get the exact timing. Looks like some parts are actually starting to get some of that rain and snow. As of 4 a.m. this morning, there were some locations starting to get it, but then widespread rain starts to build in. Should be in the next hour or two, we're going to start to see that rain along the coast and some of that widespread snow. Then that looks to be what continues all day Monday into Tuesday. Some heavier snow as we get into Tuesday, and you can see it's just widespread for almost all of Northern California. The map almost looks the exact same until we get into Thursday at 4 a.m. We just have light rain along the coast and some moderate snowfall in the Sierras. Again, that's the best way to pick up precipitation because it's not as bad for property damage, but it's good because you're just slowly adding onto your totals, which is great for the drought. So let's actually just try to look at the exact timing there. Again, it already is appearing to come in, and then it looks to be, for the most part, gone in Northern California. I would say by early morning Thursday, it looks for the most part to be gone. If we look at the rainfall as it goes through, there are some areas along the coast that aren't getting as much that as was originally forecasted with this system, but can't complain. There's about an inch and a half, possibly even 2 inches, stretching from Eureka to Fort Bragg. And then throughout the Bay Area, there are some locations that should be picking up an inch of rain within the next week. When it comes to the snowfall, I would say this is looking pretty similar, if not even a little bit more than some of the forecasts we were talking about last week. Right here you can see up in Northern California, that has the potential to pick up 2 feet of snow. And then up in the Sierras, it looks like we're well over a foot of snow, possibly even 1.5 feet by this Friday. And again, overall, I'd say last week the models were very shaky with what was going to happen here. It seemed like every day we looked at it, the models changed. Now I would say, as I've been following them, they've been getting more consistent, which means they've been getting more confident, which means that there's a better chance that what you see right here is actually going to happen. And that's typical with weather models. The closer you get to the actual date, the more confident and more likely what they're showing is actually going to happen. So now let's look at Southern California. Not getting a lot of that rain and snow till all the way into 10 p.m. Tuesday. Remember, the first part of it, when we looked at that energy, the first part was mostly just up there in NorCal. Now here is where the second part of that system really starts to move into California and slowly move across the state. And right there, that gives you a good idea of some of that increased storm energy that we were talking about. That's some of the heaviest rain and the heaviest snow that we've seen throughout the lifetime of the storm, which perfectly ties in to the little vorticity tray lesson we were talking about earlier. So right there, that's where much of Los Angeles down all the way into San Diego getting some decent rainfall, but then it's just light rain and snow similar to NorCal for the rest of that system, all the way into about Friday afternoon is when that light rain and snow should officially be gone. And then it looks like we're in the clear as we get into Friday night. So if we look at the precip down in SoCal, let's just click all the way through. Looks like along the coast, a little less than up in NorCal, especially in the Central Coast, where we're most likely just around 1/2 inch. But there are some locations down here just south of San Luis Obispo where we could be getting an inch. But then what's great to see is what we're getting down here all the way in Southern California from Los Angeles to San Diego, between 1/2 inch to an inch, with some locations getting even more. So that's great to see because that's one of the areas where our fuels are the driest. And then as we click through the snowfall, you'll notice that there are actually some Southern California mountains that are expected to get a foot and a half of snow with this system as it moves through. Again, that is great to see. California certainly needs the precipitation, so although there are warnings on this map, I'm actually a little bit excited for them because we could use the rain and snow. So now, let's follow this system as it continues to move across the country, and you can almost connect the dots with this system as it moves across. You can see the winter weather advisories in California turn into high wind warnings for Arizona, and then actually turn into red flag warnings for Colorado and Kansas into Missouri as we get into a little bit later into this week. Or not later into this week, but later into the system. So you can think it's coming into California first, then spreading out and bringing some of those heavier winds that are causing this fire danger there. Now, we're not going to spend too much time talking about the red flag warning and the fire danger. One, because I looked at some of the fuel moistures and it didn't look as bad as what we were talking about last week with Arizona and New Mexico. Always good to keep an eye on red flag warnings when you have one in place. And there are going to be some 40 to 45 mile per hour wind gusts there. But I think the big part of the story and what I want to focus on if we have limited time is the snowfall that's building into Colorado and then the heavy rain that's building in through Oklahoma, into Missouri and Kansas, even some parts of Arkansas. So not going to spend any time on the red flag warning, but just letting you know that there is one in place. And again, that's because there's some 45 to 50 mile per hour wind gusts while there is some low relative humidity right now. So let's follow this as it moves across the country. Right there, you can see the low moving into California, and then you're going to notice it move into the center parts of the country. So right here is where it's refueling. It's bringing in some more moisture. So it used up a lot of that moisture from the Pacific right over California, especially in the Sierras where we're getting 1.5 feet of snow. So there's some snow going through Arizona, parts of Utah, but not all that much. And that's because a lot of that moisture was used up in California. When it gets to the center of the country, that's where it starts pulling in some more moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. So that's what's going to allow some of that heavy rain to fall throughout places in Arkansas and Missouri, Oklahoma, and then some of that heavy snow to fall in parts of Colorado and Wyoming. And you'll notice as it moves in, we first start to see that snow on Friday morning, some of that heavy rain starting in Oklahoma, and it's just going to continue all the way into Saturday, into Sunday, and then it's not moving out until all the way into Monday morning. So that's why some of the totals there are going to be so great or large, because it's continual heavy rain and snow for what looks to be a number of days. If you want to see that another way, there's the trough moving through California, and then here it turns into almost a giant cutoff low that just slowly works its way across the country. It's at this point where we're bringing in that moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, some of that warm air that's allowing that heavy rainfall in parts of Oklahoma and Missouri, and then on the left side of that low, we're pulling down the cold air right into Colorado. So when that cold air mixes with the moisture, that's where we're getting the heavy snow throughout Wyoming and Colorado. If we want to see that on a more regional outlook, right there is the first part of the system. That one almost just moves straight up into the Midwest. I'm not spending too much time on that because it looks to be the weaker of the two, and I'd rather spend time on the second part. So right about here, this is getting into Friday. This is where the system has moved into the center of the country, but it's still relatively wide. It hasn't strengthened yet. Now, as it continues to, you can think about this, it's just getting tighter and bringing in more moisture, more energy, pulling down more cold air. That's where you'll notice these two areas of snowfall and rainfall get closer and closer together until they almost completely collide. And that's just telling you that the storm is getting tighter, more energy, and you can actually tell that on this map because there are many locations where we're seeing some heavy rainfall, that's 0.2 to 0.5 inches per hour, while we continue to get heavy snowfall on the colder part of that low. So I'll just click through that again. Right there, it's the system slowly forming, pulling in more and more moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, dropping more rain and snow. And you'll notice that there are some periods where there is some heavy rain and snow. So if we look at the precip, ignore up here, we're going to look at the snowfall in a second. Right here, we just want to look at Oklahoma into Missouri because that's where a lot of that heavy rain is going to be falling. With some places, it appears getting 5 to 6 inches of rain. So that's going to be a key place we're going to have to dive into to check out the exact timing of that event. Now, with the snowfall, you'll notice it's where that cold air is being pulled down into the low. It's almost like the low stalls out right over Kansas for a number of days, which allows that warm air and moisture just to continue to pile up heavy rainfall right here, and then heavy snowfall where you're bringing down that cold air. So the heaviest snowfall right there through Wyoming, Nebraska, Colorado. Large portions of Colorado getting at least 6 inches. Large portions also getting up to 8 inches. And then this select bullseye up here in the northeastern part of the state, it looks pretty likely that we're getting a foot of snow and possibly even 2 feet of snow in that one little bullseye right there. So it's interesting to notice the dividing line between these two. Right there is where we're getting the heavy snowfall, about a foot of snow building into Nebraska, possibly 2 feet into Wyoming as well. And then right there is where we get the heavy rain. That's where we get 5 to 6 inches of rain within the next week. Clearly defined, and you can just think of that low sitting right in the middle of it, bringing up moisture, pulling down cold air, basically resulting in those two maps that we're looking at. So one other aspect, before any of this rain or snow builds in, the first part of the system is going to be bringing in some wind. So I do just want to show that real quick. Looks to be on Wednesday, there's going to be some 40 to 50 mile per hour wind gusts throughout Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, and that's before a lot of this moisture has moved in. So that's where we do have a red flag warning and a fire threat, because before the moisture moves in, there is going to be some dry air. Not as dry as we were talking about last week in Arizona, but still dry, and we're mixing it with 50 mile per hour wind gusts. So that's why we have the red flag warning in place there. Again, not spending too much time on that today, but just thought I would mention it. What we do want to spend time in is where we're getting the most rain and where we're getting the most snow. Where we're getting the most rain, I would say, for the most part, was in Missouri. So let's take a look at the exact timing. First bits of light rain start to show up 12 a.m. Wednesday, but that's that first little one that mostly goes up into the Midwest. Where the real system starts forming looks to be about 12 a.m. on Thursday, and then we get some more heavy rain throughout the day, Thursday working into Thursday morning. And then you'll notice it's almost slowly forming, and that's kind of the nature of this storm. It's just slowly moving across the country, slowly organizing itself. But where it starts to really pick up is getting into Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. That looks to be where Missouri, for almost that entire time period, it looks like it starts really 12 p.m. on Friday, still getting some heavy rain, especially throughout the day Friday, and then that heavy rain continues all the way into Saturday and Sunday, even into Monday, where right there you see the low itself, which means it'll finally be moving out of the region 7 a.m. on Monday. So that's why the rainfall is going to be so great there. You can see we're getting heavy rain for a long period of time. So heavy rain means that your soils could become saturated, especially when it's falling for a long period of time. So I'm going to have to keep my eye on the warnings map to see if we get any flood concerns as we continue to look at this story. So looking at the precip as it goes through, you'll notice it just slowly starts to come in Wednesday, Thursday, and then as we get into Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, that's where the heavy totals start to build in, where we get up to 5 and 6 inches of rain throughout much of Missouri, and almost the entire state getting at least 3 inches. So I'll certainly have to keep my eye on any flood warnings and any other severe weather that could be taking place there. Right now, thinking about severe weather, there's nothing that's really standing out to me, but rainfall certainly is standing out, because that is a lot of rain to be getting in the course of what looks to be just 3 days. Most of that is falling Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Now, where we have that snowfall is for the most part in Colorado. So I want to focus there. It looks like it starts about between 5 a.m. and 11 p.m. on Tuesday. Then that's the first part of the system. Again, we saw that when we're looking at the rainfall too. There's just it's almost like a little pump fake. You think that might be the storm itself, but that's just a little taste of what's to come later. Now, where we start to see it really pick up, you'll notice for that entire time we're at least getting some light snow. So you think throughout Wednesday, Thursday, and into Friday, we're still picking up some totals, even though it's not heavy snowfall falling. Where we start to get some heavier snowfall is as we get into 11 p.m. Friday. This is where that storm is really starting to organize and bring in some moisture reinforcements from the Gulf of Mexico. That's where almost all of Colorado is getting snowfall throughout Friday into Saturday. That's where some more heavy snowfall appears to be falling, and especially up here in the northeast, where it looks like we're getting snowfall for a long period of time. So that's why the totals up there are going to be the largest, because we're still getting snowfall all the way into 12 p.m. Friday. So just thinking about the timing of that, wow, just clicking through there, you see how long it's going to last. So it comes in about 5 p.m. on Tuesday, and then 11 p.m. on Tuesday, it's really started to fill in. So think of that, 5 p.m. Tuesday, still getting light rain and snow through Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all the way into Saturday, into Sunday, into Monday, and then it's not really gone until 12 p.m. on Monday. So almost a week of picking up snowfall for Colorado. So that's why our totals are going to be so great with this. One, there are some periods where we get some heavier snowfall, but even more than that is it's just going to be falling for a long period of time. There's no points on this map where we're seeing any purple colors. That's where you get real extreme snow, where it's in the 0.5 inches per hour range, but it's constant, it's continuous, and that's what's going to allow the totals to end up being so large, because we're picking up those light to moderate snowfall totals for almost an entire week. As we click through there, you notice every time you click, the totals go up, and there's no period where it just looks like it's the full bullseye of lots of snow coming in. It's just constant for the next week. As we get into, let's actually just go to about this time next week. It looks like almost all of Colorado, I'd say all of Colorado has picked up at least some snow. Large portions have picked up 6 to 8 inches. And then up here in the northeast, where we're seeing that snowfall the most continuous, falling for the longest period of time, that's where we could have some totals over a foot, possibly even 2 feet of snow in that one little bullseye there. Looking at Denver, it looks like foot and a half of snow over the next week. So to really explain all that rain and snow as it goes through, let's take a look at this map, because this is always one of the best things to look at when actually visualizing how these storms work. And it's a bit slow right now because I have about 60 tabs open. But if we click into when the storm appears to be coming in, I'd say that's a good place to look. Right about into Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. That's where the storm appeared to be the strongest, right? That's where a lot of that heavy rain was flowing into Missouri. A lot of that heavy snow was flowing into Colorado. So there's actually not a real clear picture that paints what we're looking at. I'd say that's maybe the best one just to describe how this process works. So right there's the low pressure system right over Kansas and Nebraska. And you can see the exact thing we've been talking about throughout this video. You can actually see the wind pulling in that moisture and warm air from the Gulf of Mexico. And you think that moisture goes right above Missouri and Oklahoma. That's what gives us the 5 to 6 inches of rain over the next week. On the left side of the low, you think it's going counterclockwise, and you can actually see that here. That's where it's bringing that cold air down into Colorado. So that is where we're getting all that snowfall right there, because we're mixing that moisture from the Gulf of Mexico with that cold air going into Colorado. Now, you might have noticed one thing, and I stumbled for a second because it perfectly showed what was going on here, was that low that is first moving up into the Midwest. And one thing you notice about that is as it moves up there, the temperatures are quite warm. They're actually about 25 to 30 degrees above average. So as that moves up there, that is going to bring some precipitation, but for the most part, it's going to be bringing rain. So let's actually move up to the Midwest now. They're right about there. You start to see that low push up into the Midwest. For the most part, rain, but where we do have that cold air, if we think about that's Wednesday working into Thursday. So Wednesday working into Thursday, there's that low right there. You can see majority of the Midwest is above freezing because it's not in that blue color. Right there through Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota, that's where we are below freezing. So that's where we can actually pick up some snowfall as that first low moves through. Now, that's not even the real snowstorm that we're talking about here. The one we're talking about is the one that slowly forms over Colorado, brings over a foot of snow to Colorado, Nebraska, and then that one is going to be working its way up into the Midwest. And that one is going to have a bit more widespread snowfall because at that point, a lot of the 25 to 30 degree above average temperatures have moved a little bit farther east. They're still over Ohio and Illinois and Indiana, where you can see you're mostly getting rainfall with that, but they're gone from Minnesota and Wisconsin, so that's where we're starting to get some decent snowfall up there. We'll look at the exact totals in a second. First, I just want to show those first two systems. Right there is the little blip in the trough right here. You can see that one pushes up into Minnesota. That's our first little bit of snow. The next one has to slowly form as it moves across the country. This is where it's pulling in some moisture, and then that moves up into the Midwest. And that clearly you can see looks like the bigger of the two. So that's the one we're more focused on when it comes to this forecast. So just clicking through here, there's that first one that goes through, and you'll notice majority of the Midwest, almost all of Wisconsin looks to be getting rain with that. Just getting snow up in the very northern parts of Minnesota where we don't have those 25 to 30 degree above average temperatures. Then you see the rain continues for the Midwest. And then let's look for when that next one starts to come through. It looks to be Sunday into Monday. And you'll notice the snow is a bit more widespread, although parts of Illinois and Indiana still in that warm air, still for the most part getting rain. Michigan, same story there, still too warm to be getting a lot of that snow. Where we are getting snow with that second system though is on Monday throughout large parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin. And overall, I wouldn't say it looks like I'm hesitant to not say it's a major snowstorm yet, but there's no periods where it looks like there's 0.5 inches of snow coming in all at the same time, but it is a little bit slower moving than some of the systems we've been looking at in the past, so that will allow some of the larger totals to continue to build into the region. So this shows the temperature anomalies that we've been talking about. You can see when that first system goes through, there's actually a perfect place to show the low itself would be almost right above Minnesota here. You can tell based on what we were talking about earlier in the video where you have that cold front down to the south of a low pressure system, the warm front to the east, and there's actually the even better view of it. Right there, you can think there's the low itself, right above Wisconsin. You have the counterclockwise winds going around it. So right here is where you're pushing in that colder air. There's your cold front. On directly out the east, that's where you're pulling in some of that warm air all the way down from the Gulf of Mexico. So that's your warm front there. And both of those, you can almost think of it like a fan rotating around. Your cold temperatures spread out this way, your warm temperatures spread up north with that warm front. So right there, that paints a picture of that separation of that extremely warm air. This is all the way into Thursday. This is when that first system's going through. That's where you're 25 to 30 degrees above average throughout much of Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. So that's why you're getting rain. You're 30 degrees above average. Now where you're still above average, but at least more mild is here in Minnesota. So that's where we're actually going to be able to pick up some snow with that first system. Now with the next one, that's mostly coming in Sunday into Monday, you'll notice we have much more mild temperatures. While there are still those 25 to 30 degree above average temperatures all the way over here in Ohio, for the most part up into Minnesota and Wisconsin, we're mild to possibly even a little bit below average at some points. So looking at the snowfall as it goes in, let's take a look at the first system. You'll notice that's where much of the Midwest is still way too warm to be getting snow, so it just comes in as a strip through Minnesota. Looks like it's 2 to 4 inches there, so that's why that's not the one we're focusing on when it comes to this storm. The second one, as it builds in, you can see is much more widespread and has larger totals. That's where snow for Wisconsin looks to be about 2 to 4 inches, and then some of our totals throughout Minnesota get up to the 8 to 10 inch range. Well, again, a lot of that, the heaviest snowfall with that was falling down in Colorado and Wyoming, where there were some locations picking up 1.5 feet to even 2 feet of snow. So one thing I want to look at here, just because it was such a perfect graphic to illustrate this usual figure that you'll see in meteorology textbooks, where you have the low right there, you have the warm front and the cold front, and that I think is the big story for the storm, because that's going to decide who gets snow and who gets rain. So around that time, that's around maybe 1 a.m. on Thursday, let's actually see if we can find that on this map. 1 a.m. on Thursday, there's the low itself. I'd say this is maybe a little bit forward in this forecast. I'd say that's probably the best place to pause to try to match up with that graphic right there. So what that's showing is exactly how that works. You have the warm, moist air being pulled up all the way from the Gulf of Mexico, and you'll notice how warm those temperatures are. Then on the left side and the upper left side, that's where you're pulling that cold air down. So it's right in that boundary where you're going to be getting that snow throughout Minnesota as that low itself moves through. It's just a perfect little illustration to see how that works. Warm moisture pulling in on the east side, cold air pulling down on the west side. Where you mix that moisture with the cold air is where you're actually able to get some snow. So I would say that's the key thing to look at when we're taking a look at the local forecast. Right there, you can see where that boundary is, where you're below freezing, up almost perfectly matching where it shows in this map. Where you're below freezing, where it shows with that blue color, is where you're going to be getting snowfall. That's throughout, really starts on about 12 p.m. Wednesday, then it continues into 6 p.m. Wednesday, while where we're above freezing, that's where we're getting the rainfall. Then that heavy snowfall, or not heavy, I'd say moderate snowfall, continues all the way into 12 a.m. on Thursday before that's gone. And again, that's just the first little system. There's another larger system just slowly forming. If we were to look farther south into Oklahoma and Colorado, this is where the storm is just slowly forming, and then it moves up into the Midwest. It looks like the first little traces of it starts to show up around 1 a.m. on Monday. Might see a little bit of snow if you're up late on Sunday night, and then that's going to continue to flow in all the way into 1 p.m. on Monday, 7 p.m. on Monday, and then for the most part, just some light snow, and it's gone by Tuesday. So right there, that is the bulk of it. 1 a.m. Monday, and then to about 1 a.m. Tuesday. So that one comes through in about 24 hours, but you see, as it comes through, it will be bringing some heavier snowfall, and especially to Minnesota and Wisconsin, and with contrast with that first storm, more widespread. With the first one, Wisconsin almost completely missed out on the snow. It was just mostly rain. At this point, some of those far above average temperatures of 25 to 30 degrees above average have moved out of Wisconsin, so we're actually able to pick up some snow next Monday. How much snow are we actually going to be getting? Let's take a look at the first one that goes through. There's that strip. It's for the most part 2 to 4 inches throughout Minnesota. We do have that area up in the very northeastern parts of the state that have the ability to pick up maybe 6 to 8 inches of snow, while almost all of Wisconsin is completely missing out. Then if we look at the second system as it goes through, that's much more widespread because that's where some of that cold air has moved in as that first system moved out of the region. With that, there's large portions of Minnesota that by about this time next week will have picked up 6 to 8 inches of snow, possibly even 10 inches to, I'm hesitant to say a foot. I would say 6 to 8 inches throughout much of the state. And then parts of Wisconsin able to get at least 2 to 4 inches with that one as well, because that's where your temperatures have cooled down a little bit. So I was going to go over some of the climate forecast, but we're basically ran out of time today. So I'll just go over them quickly because there have been some changes. This is showing our 6 to 10 day average, and it looks like almost the entire country is going to be below average temperatures 6 to 10 days out. So March 13th to 17th. When we look at the 6 to 10 day averages for precipitation, this isn't exactly some good news, especially down here in the southwest, because we originally were expecting to shift to a wetter pattern. We're expecting for that rainfall to continue to California. Looks like that storm we're getting this week, hopefully some of those totals overperform the models, because it looks like in the 6 to 10 day average we're shifting back into a drier pattern, while the southeast and much of the eastern half of the country starts to get some more precipitation. 8 to 14 days out, you can see the entire country almost showing up as below average temperatures. And then 8 to 14 days out, western half of the country looks dry, and especially down here in the southwest, which again is not what we want to see when it comes to drought and fire danger. And then the eastern, really east coast stretching into the southeast is where we're expecting some rain or possibly snow 8 to 14 days out. So you'll notice these look much different than what we were talking about last week. So we're going to have to keep our eye out on these climate forecasts. This one looks the same. 3-month temperature outlook. Much of the country, even though we're going to be, for the most part, cold over the next 2 weeks, for the 3-month average, we're looking above average temperatures. When it comes to the 3-month precipitation average, again, not good to see down there in the southwest, where it looks like we're going to be dry for the next 3 months. So the fact that the 6 to 10, the 8 to 14, and the 3-month all are showing a dry pattern for the southwest really makes me hope that that storm coming through this week outperforms and we get a large amount of rain and snow. As that system goes through bringing some rain and snow to NorCal first, then it spreads out throughout the entire state. Certainly going to be hoping we get some good totals there, because I don't want to say it, but it looks like that could be our last good chance of a storm for quite some time, which isn't good news. I hate to say it, but that's not good news, because we still have large portions of the state that are in drought. The fuels are still dry. We're below average in our rainfall totals, and March is typically a month when we get a large amount of rainfall, and so far I'd say it's been pretty disappointing. Now the good news there is weather forecast models are not perfect. As we've seen throughout all these forecasts that I do every day, they change a lot. So I'm going to be hoping for a big change in pattern. Who knows, maybe the model's wrong and we actually end up getting some great rainfall for the rest of the month. Really hard to say, but as of right now, not looking the best, but we'll just have to stay tuned and see what happens. Now again, the other part of the story that we're talking about, and I'd say the top story today, is what happens as that low pressure system just sits over the middle of the country, just going to stall out there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. That's where you notice we continue to get heavy snow throughout Wyoming, Colorado, Nebraska, and then heavy rain throughout Oklahoma and Missouri. Where we have that heavy rain, there could be the chance of picking up 5 to 6 inches of rain over the next week. So we're certainly going to have to stay updated with the weather warnings map to see if there's any flood warnings or severe weather warnings with all that rain. And then I'd say it's pretty fair bet that we're going to get some winter storm warnings over here in Colorado, Wyoming, and Nebraska, where there are some locations that confidently picking up a foot of snow, possibly even 1.5 to 2 feet in the very highest elevations and coldest places. And then that eventually will work its way up into the Midwest. The key thing we'll be looking at there is where that temperature divide is between below freezing and above freezing, because that's going to decide who gets the snowfall and who gets rain. And that's a ways off in the forecast, so we're just going to be following that all week long to see what happens in the west, the center parts of the country, working up into the Midwest, and then eventually into the northeast and southeast as that storm finally spreads out. So one last look at the warnings map. We got some of those winter storm advisories and watches and warnings already showing up in California. That's because the storm is currently moving in right now. And then as it starts to move into the center parts of the country, before we start to get that moisture, we have the red flag warning there where we have some 45 to 50 mile per hour wind gusts. That's where we do have some fire danger. But I think the big part of the story for this week, what we'll be following very closely this week, one, what are the totals in California? Hopefully they're above what's being expected right now. And then also we'll follow how that snowfall and rainfall forecast changes for Colorado working into Missouri, where again, I think that is going to be the top story for the week that we'll be following throughout future forecast videos. So, I hope this was helpful today and hope everybody has a good start to their week and had a great weekend. And thanks for watching.